some of these Methodist records will still be held in local custody, and you'll have to go to the local Methodist ministry to consult them. With regard to Roman Catholic records, PRONI holds a copy of the microfilms that were produced a number of years ago by the National Library of Ireland. But the records have only been filmed up to 1880, so after 1880 you will have to go to the local parish priest to consult the post-1880 records. And again, these records that are on microfilm cover not just Northern Ireland, but will cover the border counties of Cavan, Monaghan and Donegal. Some of the smaller churches like the Congregational Church and the Baptist Church, for example, a lot of their records have not been filmed, and in fact probably our knowledge of just what still exists in those two denominations, there's probably still a bit of work to do just to find out exactly what those two denominations have. The Religious Society of Friends, who have an excellent archive, all the Quaker records relating to Northern Ireland have been filmed by PRONI, and you'll see the reference number for those in your handout under Mix 16. The Quaker records for meeting houses in the Republic are held at the Dublin Friends Historical Library. And you can get a very good overview of the Quaker records that have survived for the whole of Ireland in Olive Goodbody's Guide to Irish Quaker Records, and I have that listed on your handout. The Moravians, another dissenter denomination, all their records are held at Grace Hill, and all those records have been filmed by PRONI, and again you'll find the reference number on your handout. I think there's still some additional records that are held by the congregation at Kilwarlen that have not yet been filmed, and I don't think any of the records of the Belfast and Moravian churches have yet been filmed as well. So in spite of all these problems, it is possible to have successful searches in church records. But again, this is, it really is dependent on the survival of the record, but also on the amount of detail that is actually recorded in these registers. And I want to give you a little flavour just of the variation and the detail that is often recorded in these records. Let's look at baptisms first of all. This is a slide of a baptism register for the Presbyterian Church of Fonnet in County Donegal, and this is probably the fullest type of baptism register that you will find. It gives the name of the child. Not only does it give the date of baptism, but it also gives the date of birth as well. It gives the name of the father, and very conveniently it gives the maiden name of the mother. And not all baptism registers will record that. It records where they lived, and again, not all baptism registers will record the place of residence, and records the occupation of the father. So you can see in that particular baptism register, you're going to get a lot of information that's going to be very useful to you. But here's another example of a baptism register. This time, all we're told is Jane, daughter of William McVicar, and which parish they lived in. No details of which townland they lived in, no details of the Christian name or maiden name of the mother. Sometimes it's even more sparse. In this particular one, Elizabeth Harbinson, all we know is the date of baptism and that she was the daughter which it just gives the name of the father. And this time it does actually give the townland they lived in. Here's another one. All I'm getting here is John Melvin, son of Robert Melvin, on the date of baptism. So not much information in that baptism register. This is an example of a pro forma Church of Ireland register which began to be used in the early 19th century. And as I say, this was an attempt to force ministers to record information consistently. So here you're getting the date of baptism as well as the date of birth. You'll get the child's name, you'll get the name of the parents, but it doesn't give the maiden name of the mother. You'll get their place of residence, and you get the occupation of the father. So you'll find that a lot of Church of Ireland baptism registers are in this kind of format. So how can I use church register, baptism registers for if I'm doing a little local history? Well, you can study, for example, what families were living in the townland or the parish, and see was there any consistency over the years. Those families there's still some of those families still living in that townland. From a study of the surnames, you can infer, for example, whether families were native Irish or were Scots or English. You can look at the extent to which families were having their children baptised in the Church of Ireland in the 18th century, which will tell you something about the conditions at the time. I should perhaps mention another, perhaps a relatively unknown source for baptisms and sometimes marriages, and that's 13 volumes of searches in Church of Ireland registers, and these searches were requested in order to ascertain whether the applicant in the early 20th century was eligible for the old age pension. So they were searching for proof of baptism in these Church of Ireland baptism registers, which before 1922, some of them were lodged in the Public Record Office, and this information was abstracted. Now, these searches are available in the Public Record Office in Dublin. Now, PRONI is supposed to have a set of microphones, but so far they haven't been able to locate them, and I know they don't have them because I've actually seen them here at some stage. But it is a relatively unknown, perhaps, little cache of information about baptisms that you may not know about. Let me turn now to marriages. Marriages don't vary to the same extent in terms of the information that's recorded. From 1845 onwards, Protestant marriages will be registered, were registered by the General Register Office, and they'll always be, post-1845 marriage registers will always look like this. They will be consistent. So you'll get the date of marriage, you'll get the names of the two parties. Sometimes it will give the exact age, but very often all it says is full age. In other words, they were over 21, or if they were under 21, it'll just say a minor. But sometimes you do get the actual age, which is very useful, because then you can work out an approximate year of birth. It'll give their condition, in other words, whether they were a bachelor or a spinster or a widow or a widower. It'll give the occupation of the two parties who were getting married and where they were living, and you'll get the name of the two fathers of the parties who were getting married and their occupation. So after 1845, marriage registers will always look like this. Before 1845, sometimes all you will get is the names of the two parties who were getting married and the name of the parish. You don't get any other details about who the parents of those two people who were getting married. I put this slide in here because again, this is another little alternative source to using church records, because if you didn't want to have banns read in church, you could take out a marriage license, but in order to take out a marriage license, you had to enter into a marriage license bond. And these marriage license bonds, unfortunately, were deposited in the Public Record Office in Dublin in 1922, and therefore were all lost. But we have the indexes. And these indexes are available in the Public Record Office here under MIC 5B, if you're looking for these. They date largely from the 18th century, but for the Diocese of Armagh and Clogher, they in fact begin in the late 17th century. So it's a little source you might want to look at if you're looking for very early records. And the indexes will name the two parties and their place of residence. And sometimes you can get extracts from these marriage license bonds in some of the notebooks that were kept by genealogists like Tennyson Groves, who was working in the Public Record Office in Dublin before 1922. So how can I use marriage registers in a local study? Well, where addresses are given, you can study where the grooms and the bride found their partner. Did they find them sort of relatively close? Or did they have to go into a neighbouring parish or even further afield to look for a partner? Look at the rise and decline in the number of marriages. Did a decline, for example, coincide with the establishment of other churches in the area? Are there any seasonal patterns to marriage? Were there a reduced number, for example, during Lent, and that may indicate the extent of church discipline? Burials, again, the information recorded in burials tends to be more standard. You'll get the name and address of the deceased. You'll get the date of burial, and sometimes you will get the age of the person who had died. And again, if that's given, you can obviously work out the approximate date of birth. Very rarely will you get the date, the cause of death recorded in these burial registers, but sometimes you do. Here's one exception. This is an example of a burial register, well, really I suppose a death register that was kept by the Reverend Dr. McGill in First Antrim Presbyterian Church. And not only is it very unusual for a Presbyterian church to keep a register of deaths, but he did so because he also had some medical training, so he was obviously interested in finding out why people who died. So you can see here a long list of people who died of cholera. At the very bottom, there's an interesting one, second up from the bottom there, drowned in the river Ganges, was in the army. Possibly somebody who served in the East India Company. So, you know, you get lots of incidental detail in these death registers. And he also compiled these family trees, and sometimes he did these little doodles. Now, I don't think these are exact representations of the people concerned, but it's quite interesting that he messed about like this on his register. So this is First Antrim, Mill Row Presbyterian Church. And this register is actually held by the Presbyterian Historical Society. But it has been microfilmed and will be available on microfilm here. Occasionally you get little pen pictures of individuals who died. This is an example from Ballenham Reformed Presbyterian Church. So if you look at the very last entry there, it refers to old Alex Small of Lattery, who was in life a kind, talented, good man. So sometimes you get little pen pictures of individuals recorded, which is rather nice, which you're getting some idea of the kind of person that he or she was. So what do I do if there are no early registers of baptisms and marriages and burials? There are other alternatives that are well worth examining. Not all Church of Ireland records that were declared public records, and these other records may be earlier in date than the registers of baptisms, marriages and burials. For example, vestry minutes. They were never declared public records, so a lot of these vestry minute books were held in local custody. And I should say that these vestry minute books can sometimes contain baptism, marriage and burial entries for the 17th and 18th centuries. And these will not always be highlighted in a catalogue entry that you find or in the Guide to Church Records. So where you see early vestry minutes that predate the registers, excuse me, it is always worth checking the vestry minutes for register entries. However, even if they don't record any baptisms, marriages and burials, they are still useful because they will contain the names of a whole host of people. The parish was the unit of civil administration up until the early 19th century. And parish activities were financed by a parish levy known as the cess tax. The men who collected the cess tax were known as cess plotters, who were appointed by the vestry. So in these vestry minutes, you're going to get the names of the cess plotters, and sometimes, if you're very fortunate, you'll actually get lists of the cess payers themselves. So that really forms a little mini census. It's a census substitute, if you like, for that parish. Parish responsibilities included the maintenance of the roads in the parish. So you'll get the names of the overseers of the roads recorded. And this particular example, there's a list, it lists the names of the individuals and says they were appointed overseers of the highways. Another important role of the vestry was to look after those in need. That was the early benefit system. No social security in those days, so the parish took on that role. And this included care of the elderly, the poor, the sick, the disabled, the widowed, the orphaned, as well as abandoned children, are sometimes referred to as foundlings. And the minutes will record the names of those who were assisted by the parish, and the names of the overseers of the poor. I think in this particular one, here's this particular slide, you can see on the left hand side you get the church wardens listed, names of the plotters, overseers of deserted children, also overseers of public houses as well. And on the right hand side you can see the list of a number of children who were assisted by the parish. Lists of the poor and the widowed who received assistance are very often recorded. The names of individuals who received money to look after deserted children, sometimes recorded, or money that was given to people to transport these deserted children to the Foundling Hospital in Dublin can sometimes be found as well. And the vestry regularly issued money to pay for burials in cases where the family were too poor to pay for the burial themselves. And in addition, the names of the church wardens appointed will also be recorded in these vestry minutes. After the 1830s and the 1840s, these vestry minutes become less informative because the state began to take over control of a lot of these functions. You know, for example, the care of the destitute poor became the responsibility of the Board of Guardians in 1838. Again, another alternative source of information in the Church of Ireland record would be confirmation registers. And sometimes you can get the names of people who were confirmed recorded actually in the vestry minutes, but very often you'll get separate registers of confirmations as well, separate books recorded. And I should incidentally say that sometimes you get the names of people who were confirmed at the very back of a baptism, marriage and burial register. So in fact, if a baptism and a burial and a marriage register, for example, starts in 1813, and you find at the back of that volume there's a list of members confirmed, and they're probably in maybe their teens, late teens, and they won't be in the baptism register. So have a look at the back of the volume and see what else is in there. You might find some confirmation lists recorded. Account books, another source of information. Maintaining the fabric of the church occupied much of the time of the vestry. Everything from the repair and building work, erecting pulpits and making pews. And the account books will record the names of those who were paid for their services. People who have found employment in the service of the rector will sometimes be recorded. The names of servants, the names of gardeners and coachmen, sometimes recorded. Account books will also record the names of those who gave money to the church or who received financial assistance from the parish. So for example, this particular one, about 3/4 of the way down there, to James Cardwell,